matter this morning, navigating the tenant landscape. As we get into the conversation today, I want to, first set the stage for the discussion. Certainly, we have all experienced the last 6 months, but everyone's experience has been a bit unique. So, Tim, I'd love to kick it off with you. And the first question, what was the immediate impact and what did you observe as a reaction in the overall marketplace in the wake of the immediate shutdown?
Well, I think the immediate shutdown really happened in the month of March, if I remember. And I was talking about it with some of my partners at work. It's similar to a professional golf tournament where there's hundreds of participants and it's busy and the course is full. And not only are there all sorts of participants, each with their own story, but there's hundreds of spectators and they're anxiously watching the action and they're at the course. And then there's ones watching from very far away as well. And then all of a sudden, the thunderstorm warning horn goes off, and 10 minutes later, the entire coast is completely clear. There's nobody in view in any direction. And all we have are storm clouds. And that's really similar to what's happened in the commercial real estate market in the month of March. We really saw an incredible slowdown, people pulling back, retreating, saying, wait, I need time to think this through. Transactions slowed down and everybody sees dark clouds on the horizon. And it's been very, very difficult for things to advance. And I think unless tenants really had a very pressing need and a lease expiring very soon, everybody has stayed on the sidelines as much as possible and has shown a lot of caution and a lot of trepidation about making their next move. That's been my experience.
Thank you for that, Tim. And I think your metaphor is, I think, a great one. And I'm gonna build on that and say, David Paletti, you and AmeriHealth, you were one of the participants in that golf game that Tim just mentioned, and active in the marketplace. I'd love to understand more from you about how your operations were specifically impacted in the wake of the shutdown.
Sure, Caitlin. So I like Tim's analogy also. It was a no warning, a storm that really forced us to move 7,000 associates from offices to work from home with no warning. And so for us, it was a mad scramble to get technology to people that weren't equipped to work from home. And then, of course, get that all set up in relatively short order, weeks, not months. We did it all in about a two-week period. And there were some hiccups, but largely things have settled down. People have adjusted to this new work life. And so we continue. And then in the midst of all that, we are building a new headquarters that we're delivering at the end of the year. And that project was 3/4 of the way done when this thing happened. And we are proceeding with the construction and with plans to deliver the space at the end of the year as was our original intent. How we move into the new space is something that we're still working through and discussing, and also thinking about how we're going to bring people back into the office, how many, and what are the hurdles that we're going to have to deal with to make this thing work.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. David Skolnick, I can imagine over the last 5 months and continuing now, you are having clients call you, day in and day out for counsel and guidance. What has been the tone and the focus of those conversations?
Sure, and certainly in the beginning, the tones were sort of a mad scramble. By the way, we represent tenants, landlords, borrowers, lenders, so we kind of see the whole picture. And it was a bit of a mad scramble. People were asking, what could they do? They weren't even sure what they wanted to do necessarily, but what could they do? And then of course, the discussion went into, what did they want to do? A lot of the discussion centered around what were their legal rights, and words that kept popping up that I'm sure a lot of people on this call will have said or heard were force majeure. Did they have a contractual provision in their agreement that provided for a situation that was covered or not covered by this situation? And also, could they rely on other legal principles and practicability, frustration of purpose, legal principles that are out there but not necessarily embedded in contracts? So we had a lot of discussions about that. And then I think, since then, there's been a bit of a holding pattern. We'll get to a little bit later some of the things that are going on, but a lot of clients, I agree with Tim, by the way, that a lot of it was people going to the sidelines saying, if we can postpone something, if we can delay something, we're going to do that. I saw lenders reaching out to borrowers saying, how can we help you? How can we work with you? I saw landlords working out, the same thing, reaching out to tenants in ways that have not necessarily been present in previous downturns. And that kind of communication was encouraging.
I think that's hopefully encouraging for everyone on the line as well, and insightful to give just a flavor from a couple different perspectives of how the market and the different players within the market really reacted earlier this year at the time of the shutdown. Right now, I'd like to invite our audience to join us in participating in a poll question to help set the stage a little bit more for the balance of our discussion this morning and how we target responses and questions. You'll see that poll question pop up on your screen in a moment here. And we invite you to answer. The question is, at the time of the shutdown, were you engaged in any real estate activities that were impacted? And we'd like to know what form those activities took: site selection, lease negotiations, construction of a new project, expansion efforts, FF&E, etc. So hopefully everybody we're getting some responses in right now. I can still see a couple coming through, so we'll give everybody a moment just to respond, and then we'll share that up on the screen for everyone to see the results. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll in just about 5 seconds here. Register your answer if you have not. Okay, so very excited to share these results with everyone. You should be able to see them on your screen now. So an overwhelming majority of folks on the line with us today did have an actual construction project, new space or renovation underway at the time of the shutdown. Next up, FF&E upgrades and lease negotiations. So really a lot of different real estate activities that were going on that were likely halted in the wake of the shutdown. So we're excited to talk to you more about our shared experiences in those realms as we continue through our conversation today. And I'd like to use that to really transition into a section of our discussion this morning about, refocus and reentry. We talked about the immediate wake of the shutdown, but things are slowly changing. They're slowly reopening up. And actually, David Skolnick, I'd love to start off this section with you. You spoke with us about the focus of your conversation with clients in the immediate wake of the pandemic, but bringing us to the current moment and really our current state. What legal actions and legal proceedings are you seeing sought, and what is actually available for people at this time?
Yeah, I think certainly On the consensual end, I see a lot of landlords and tenants working together in trying to defer rent and or come to an accommodation where an accommodation is possible. I also see landlords doing a little bit of triage and saying, hey, if there was a tenant that was doing, and I'm sure Brianna will speak to this a little later also, but if there's a tenant who was doing well, you want to work with them. If there was a tenant who was kind of a total deadbeat before the pandemic and is not communicating and is not, was not doing well beforehand, you might not be as accommodating to that tenant. In terms of the legal actions that people are trying to do, I've seen people try to do foreclosures, in some cases consensual foreclosures, and not really having much success at it at all in terms of being able to proceed. In Pennsylvania, the governor has issued a couple of orders that have delayed residential actions, but I know that a lot of the courts are more broadly interpreting those to cover commercial transactions as well. Montgomery County is an example where the sheriff's office, even though they're allowed to do commercial foreclosures, they've decided not to list foreclosure sales for any properties whatsoever until October. And that's the earliest date at this point you can get on the calendar. So, we're seeing quite a lot of, courts reluctant to proceed. I had a commercial eviction that was postponed. So the word of the day really is good luck finding a court that is willing to proceed with an action at this point if you're on that side. And if you're on the tenant side, you have a little bit of breathing room, but don't get too excited. I would certainly be working with your landlords and trying to accommodate them and try to come to a deal with them, because if you have a problem that is not being solved now, I don't think this can possibly continue forever. I think at some point these courts are going to begin to open up, and we're beginning to see that in some places.
Thank you. Brianna, representing Parkway, you're a landlord and a developer. David, just speaking now, referenced some collaboration that he's seen between, tenants and landlords. How has your business focus shifted recently to address both your own business concerns as well as that of your tenants?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Caitlin. We were definitely on the receiving end, right, of a lot of tenant requests, right? We have a pretty significant retail presence in addition to our development, our parking assets, and it kind of came in waves, right? Like, so as Tim was talking about, there was a first wave where we had some of our retail tenants come to us in distress, right? Like, we have a couple entertainment venues that just, they're not able to host like concerts or what they would normally do, or weddings. So being able to work with them on creative structures in terms of rent deferrals and lease extensions till they're in a more stable place was important. Some of the rent, and it's again, tenant by tenant, right? Because one tenant sent us a blanket statement of all their stores throughout the country being like, we're not paying rent to anybody. And you're like, okay, that's nice. You're still open for lunch and we see you open for lunch. So working with them really to understand that their markets are each different and working something out. I had another tenant come to us initially in March asking for rent relief, and then they were able to access PPP funds. And when I called the tenant back, the guy was great. On the phone, he just said, we don't need it anymore. We got our PPP and we're gonna pay rent. And I almost cried because it was just like such like an old school gentlemanly kind of business transaction where they wanted to do right by our relationship. And then, we have smaller mom and pop tenants where you want to work with them as much as possible. And then the second wave, it's been interesting because we've been trying to be creative about our spaces, right? So parking is obviously down a bit given that people aren't going to work or entertainment. So we have some vacant space. And it's interesting working with retailers right now because what they're dealing with, right? Like we're working with one restaurant and they were trying to do something interesting on the top of one of our garages, like outdoor dining. And we have a significant footprint. You can fit a lot of people, very socially distanced, but every day the regulations keep changing. So it's really hard to come to a business deal if, one day you can't serve alcohol without food, or if next week you can serve alcohol with food, or, you know, we're going to go back and shut down, so it makes no sense to invest into the infrastructure of the space if it's not going to be open a week from now. So I think right now we're still dealing with a lot of uncertainty around what the regulations are. But look, overall, right, I think David mentioned this before, that landlords have been more accommodating or more collaborative during this, because I think at the end of the day, this is a human problem, right? It's a pandemic. People are getting sick. This doesn't differentiate who you are, what your business is. Everybody's impacted. And it's really important to be collaborative and understanding that these are people's livelihoods and it's out of a lot of our control. So the best we can do is be as flexible and responsive as possible as we go forward. Absolutely.
Absolutely. I think it's encouraging to hear the type of collaboration and flexibility that you're trying to foster within your business and the folks that you have influence over. David Paletti, I'd love to direct this next question to you. You know, we heard from Brianna about collaboration between landlords and tenants trying to address their concerns, but she also made a really great statement, which is this is a human problem, and to some degrees it comes down to that human aspect of business, of operations, and you are dealing with an entire employee constituency in planning your reentry efforts. So I'd love to know from you, what are some of the biggest concerns that you're trying to address in your reentry planning efforts?
Well, I think first and foremost, we have to make our buildings as safe as possible. And, you know, whether that be adjusting ventilation systems or do temperature screenings and things like that, to make sure that when associates do return to the workspace, that we're doing everything possible to keep them safe. Because the reality is, people have a great apprehension, great fears about coming back to work. People could have health issues, could have issues with taking care of kids. It's really a global issue, bringing people back to work. So it's multifaceted. And certainly, it gets complicated when we're in multi-tenant buildings as opposed to single-tenant buildings. We have both. In multi-tenant buildings, we have less control. There are other companies in these buildings, and we have to rely on the safety of everybody doing their job. In a single-tenant building, we have more control. We run the security, we run the ventilation. So we have to take different approaches in a multi-tenant versus a single-tenant building. But mostly, we just want our associates to know that we're doing the best we can to keep them safe. That's the most important message.
Absolutely, and I think that really touches on that human aspect of our current situation and what we're all dealing with in the COVID-19 environment. I'd love to re-engage the audience again at this time and invite them to participate in our second poll question today. You'll see that pop up on your screen in just a moment here. The question is, what is the current reentry outlook for your own workplace? Are you work from home with no reopen date, work from home with a reopen date, a hybrid approach with some office facilities available to you, or totally open? Your office facilities are available with COVID safety precautions implemented. While we have folks answering that question, I'll offer some insight from Watchdog. We did a little bit of an internal poll across our client base, and of our active clients right now, 30% of them are still all remote work, all telework, work from home. 59% are in a hybrid approach, so some of their portion of their office facilities are available to them on a limited basis, and 11% are actually in the office full time. I know I found those numbers a bit surprising. I thought that they would skew a bit differently when they came back. I'm going to go ahead and close our poll that's up right now to see how our audience responses match up. So you should see the results on your screen right now. You can see there is an overwhelming response that folks are working in a hybrid model. So some telework with limited office facilities available to them. The next highest response was actually open with office facilities available while COVID safety precautions are implemented. That was at 21%. So I think that's really interesting to dive into the next section of our discussion today, which will really focus on reentry status and reentry planning. Tim, I'd love to kick this over to you. Are you surprised at all that the overwhelming majority of folks on the line today are operating in a hybrid model, and how you think that matches up against what you're seeing within the marketplace as a whole?
I can't say that I am surprised. I think there a lot of people really miss going to the office, and they're feel like they might be more productive at the office, and yet there's a lot of fear, justifiably so, about returning to our normal, ordinary patterns. I think there's a spectrum between black and white, and the gray in the middle is the spectrum of how well landlords and individual employers have done in making their employees and their tenants feel safe upon reentry. I mean, we've all been through this work from home drill, and everybody's figured out that we can work from home and probably do it better than we would have guessed prior to this 6-month-long work from home or 5-month-long work from home drill that we've all been forced into. And yet there is some still real drive for the office. I have a couple partners that have very young children at home, and we've had very wide ups and downs in terms of support and daycare and in-home care for those kids, and the young parents have a tough time working from home. I think a lot of people from my generation have had a tougher time working from home who maybe aren't as skilled with technology. Our company did a fantastic job and is serving now as a case study for me on how to re-enter the workplace. And I grew up with Studley, that was much more of a local flair, and now being part of Savills, a publicly traded company on the London Stock Exchange, I'm seeing internally what it means to have a higher maybe caliber of corporate governance and supervision. So our reentry has been extremely well choreographed. I'm the one that said, I'm not going back in 2020. All right, I'm not a kid. I might have some underlying health conditions. I was nervous. I said, I'm not going in. I'm not doing it. But the 1.5 hour long presentation that our company gave, the new policies and procedures, and also, interestingly, the partnership that we formed with our landlord here in Philadelphia has been really outstanding. And the base building steps and the new policies and procedures that our landlord took have been really outstanding. And I've collected now 15 buildings back to work guides, and I'm lucky to be in one that I would rate the single highest out of the 15. So we've seen base building infrastructure enhancements and new investment. Usually our clients fight hard to not have to participate financially in that, and we're now enjoying the benefit of that. And also upgraded procedures that make us feel safer going back to work. Now, we are hybrid in the form that we saw a moment ago, because we're maintaining less than 50% density in my office. And there was a very well planned and choreographed plan. We have an A team, a B team, and a C team, and A and C come in together, and then A and B come in together, and each team's in twice a week unless you have to show up. So we're in a hybrid situation right now, and all of that has been a very interesting series of experiences for me to study as this has gone on.
I think folks would feel the same. You know, I'd love to get the rest of our panelists' take on the responses that we got. Brianna, I'd love to start with you. How does this match up with your thoughts and what you're seeing?
Yeah, I mean, as the millennial on the panel, and I turn 30 next month, so I'm just going to keep rubbing that in because I feel like I'm getting old. I have been very
Ancient.
fortunate. Yeah, I know, over the hill. I've been very fortunate to work for companies over the years that have been very generous in their remote work policies. So also as a millennial, I think my generation specifically is more used to flexible work environments, right? So like I've worked out of a car sometimes, I've worked out of like random offices, I've been on a construction site. It really just depends. I can work out of a coffee shop, right? I can pretty much work anywhere. And frankly, like there are times where like I can work better. It's like being in college, right? There are times where I want to go to the library where I can't hear anything. And there's times I want to sit in the community center and watch Sports Center on repeat because it becomes like white noise. So like having the hybrid approach is kind of nice because then there are days where I want to go in the office like I did yesterday where it's just, I can focus, I get to see another human being, I had a great conversation with one of my colleagues. There's like a very like alchemic kind of reaction that happens when you're around other people that doesn't happen when it's just a Zoom call. And then just to plug Parkway for a second, our property management staff has done a killer job on both like our internal reentry process of being in the office, of limiting people in elevators, I have no idea how our property manager, Lisa, sourced all the sanitation and these giant buckets of sanitation wipes that she did, but has done a fabulous job. We have tenants who are hospital users and just being really thoughtful and thorough with that reentry plan because it's important, you know, from a tenant landlord perspective and also again from the human perspective of really going the extra mile to take care of your tenants and the people in the buildings and making people feel safe because again safety is undergirding a lot of what will make people come back to work.
Absolutely. David Skolnick, kicking it over to you. What are you seeing in comparison to our audience's response of that hybrid work model and kind of in response to what Brianna just said?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I mean, I can speak for my firm. We have about 100 employees total, so we're a relatively small shop, but we have 4 different offices, and in our smaller offices, which are in the suburbs, most of those people are actually back working for a variety of reasons. We have one office that does a lot with a lot of family law, which requires going into court, and the court is open. And the office is right next to the court, so they are actually going in quite a lot. And similarly, we have an office in Harrisburg that's relatively small and 4 employees there, and it's a low-rise building. They can drive right up, they can walk right in. It's very easy. And then we've got our high-rise presence, which is at 1 Logan Square, which Brandywine has done a terrific job here. I hate to plug Brandywine because I'm always on the other side of cases for them. But they've been doing a good job here. But there aren't any people in this building. I mean, I've come into the office 3 or 4 times in the last couple of weeks, and I will tell you that I don't see anybody in the elevator lobby. I don't, except the security people, and I don't see anybody in the elevators, and I don't, and I haven't seen more than a couple people in our office. So, I think the one thing that I did want to mention was there is a mental health issue that I think on both sides is something that we're monitoring very closely. We do know that a lot of our employees are not exactly happy being home and are really struggling with that. At the same time, they're afraid to come back to work because they're not sure what they're going to find. They're all sure that they're going to be able to maintain social distancing, but they're uncomfortable about how do they get to the office, especially in a high-rise building. They're uncomfortable about how do they get to work and how do they get up the elevators. And they're also a little uncomfortable. Everybody believes they'll be okay, but they're sure that the person next to them is not going to follow the rules. And how do we make people comfortable that everybody's going to be okay? That's the challenge that we're having right now.
Well, I think David brings up a really good point. It's not just working from home, right? It's working from home during a global pandemic. Like people forget that point where it's like everything is complicated from a mental health perspective to a reentry perspective because of during the global pandemic portion of that.
Yeah, and I think Brianna, you actually mentioned earlier to me that this is not a choice. You're not working from home by choice. Right.
Exactly.
You're required to work from home, and with that compulsion comes a feeling of loss of control. I don't know that you said that, but I think that's very true. That people, when they have a loss of control, I think there's a loss of mental health right there.
Absolutely. I have to imagine, David Paletti, that these are some of the things that are coming up for you in terms of your reentry planning and you know, reacting to your employee base about what they want and their needs. How has that manifested into your current state? Do you fit into one of these categories in terms of hybrid, all telework, all remote work? How has that manifested for AmeriHealth?
Well, we're largely work from home. We are a little bit of a hybrid right now. I think it's two things. I think, you know, when we rushed everybody to work from home, the first couple months was okay, but now what we're finding is people need to come back to the office to get files that they left, or that now that work from home has become a little more, has more longevity, a little more permanent in some way. People are looking to bring things back from the office to their house so that it can be a little more efficient, because certainly we've done a good job as an organization. I think everyone would agree working from home has been better than we expected. But however, having said that, there are things that are lacking working from home. I think the collaboration, the face-to-face, the creativity is somewhat lost, as Brianna pointed out. And there are people that just can't work from home efficiently. They need the support system of an organization, or they have family situations that don't allow them to work from home efficiently, kids running around the house, whatever. So, you know, I think the sense I get is people like the combination of being able to, the work flexibility of working from home, but I think a large portion of people wouldn't mind coming back to the office once in a while to see the people that they work with. And I think that's where most companies are going to land.
Yeah, I hear you. And that's a perfect segue into our third poll question, which is, you know, we asked what the outlook is for your organization and their reentry plans, but we'd love to know from the audience, you know, are you as an individual, are you ready to return to a shared workplace environment? Has it been too long since you've seen your colleagues? Is it too soon with all the uncertainty related to the status of the virus? And, you know, we offered a third option here, which is just you're unsure, because I think a large theme of our environment right now, frankly, is uncertainty. So to echo Brianna and be a millennial on the call, I think it would be quite on trend to be unsure right now. So we've got some responses rolling in. I'm going to give just a little bit longer for those to come through before we share them with everyone, and we'll dive in to some more insights from our panelists based on your answers.
Kim, are you in the office? Are you in your office?
I'm in my home office today, although
I always liked your background. I never just thought it was like it looks like an office. So well done on like winning the home office like background thing. I was trying to find things I could put in the background that was going to be like fine, and it was like I have all the Philadelphia sports tchotchkes. I was like, wow, I've actually accumulated a lot of these over the years.
So I win the best home office backdrop, so I have that going for me, which is nice, right?
Yeah.
Those are my collection of old Studley t-shirts from our annual trips that we went on that my wife made into wall hangings for me.
Oh, that's super cool, actually. That's really cool.
More ideas
Cool.
per square foot.
Nice.
I love it. I think that's, we can put, you know, background and home office decor right in the category of the Zoom shirt, right? These new trends that are coming up in the world of telework. So we do have our responses back from the audience of, you know, are you ready to return to a shared workplace environment? 41% of folks on the line with us said yes, it's been too long. 33% of folks said no, it's too soon. And 25% of people on the line with us said that they are simply unsure. I think that to me, I think what's most surprising of the out of the results is not necessarily a majority or a minority response, but honestly that we're almost evenly divided, right? the numbers are pretty close in terms of folks that are saying, I'm ready, I'm not ready, or I don't know yet. And I think that that's an honest way to represent overall feelings today. And building off of that conversation, you know, David Poletti, I'm sure you are having a lot of conversations internally about timing in terms of reentry and what would be the right time. Do you see the response from our audience in terms of, yes, we're ready, no, we're ready, or we're not sure? Do you see that aligning with what you've encountered internally, and how is that translating into your reentry planning?
It's really been, Caitlin, all over the map. I think it's the type of job that you have, maybe the age category. I think it's influenced by a lot of different things, and I'm not sure we have a handle on where we're going to land. I mean, we meet every week and talk about return to work, and we're not there yet. And we're doing some polling, but I think the poll results that you have would mirror my thinking. I think a good segment of the population is ready to come back to work in some fashion. But I do think there's a large segment, 30–40% of the people that aren't ready to come back to work for many reasons, and I think safety is the main one.
Absolutely. You know, we've talked that theme of safety, or the topic of safety and topic of fear and apprehension has actually sort of weaved its way into a lot of our conversations today. David Skolnick, I'd like to understand from you maybe how that's going to manifest into legal protections and what we see people putting in place to protect themselves upon reopening.
Sure. And I should start by saying that there are a lot of state laws that are being, or really bills, I guess at this point, that are being introduced. In some cases, the laws are in place. The vast majority of states seem to be focusing on health professionals and making sure that health professionals can open up without fear of liability. And those laws tend to be reasonably protective. A lot of states, and maybe a growing number of states, have focused not just on healthcare professionals, but on, you know, everybody opening up, and what can you do and what must you do when you open up. A lot of the laws that are being introduced reflect that they want people to follow CDC guidelines, and that if you can follow CDC guidelines, there will be a certain amount of protection. I should add that having reviewed a lot of those laws, I believe that a good plaintiff's lawyer will be able to drive a truck through pretty much any of them and find liability for employers or other people opening up. So I wouldn't get too excited about, even if you do see a law that says, oh, sure, we're protecting you know, bar owners or restaurant owners when you open up. No, if you read through the fine print, there will be enough lawsuits that will come out of this. I should mention that a couple of cases have come down on the force majeure front, which perhaps not surprisingly, one of the cases goes one way, one case goes the other way. In Massachusetts, they said, hey, we understand that you know, that there's a problem here. Well, there's always a different kind of problem, whether it's terrorism, or whether it's wars, or whether it's other kinds of things, and we're going to treat COVID-19 kind of the same way we treat all of that, which is to say, if your contract addresses it, you're fine, and if it doesn't, you know, we're probably not going to give you much relief. On the other hand, there's a bankruptcy case out of Northern Illinois that protects a tenant, has protected a tenant in a situation where the tenant was only able to open about 25%. The court said, well, we're going to make them pay 25% of their rent. I don't know that that is a solution for anybody, but it's an interesting, you know, it's interesting that we are having these cases come out that begin to at least interpret what people's rights are.
Absolutely. I think it's a sign of everyone trying to figure it out. And to that end, Brianna, you know, as a landlord and a developer, I'd love to understand from you how and where you think the focus will shift as we continue to navigate through the changing environment.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question. And so Parkway is great because we develop across many assets, right? So from a commercial point of view, it's going to be really interesting as you start to see tenants decide whether or not they need the amount of space they've needed in the past. So do you go from needing every one of your employees to be in the office all the time, or are you going to downsize to needing 50% of your workforce in the office at one time? Or is it more of a model where it's like a hoteling model where like people come and go as they please, right? Like show up for meetings if you need to, do what you need to, but you're not in the office at all. So it's going to be really interesting to kind of see, and maybe Tim can talk to this, but like to see what size requirements are going to come out of this in terms of what spaces people are going to want. From a retail perspective, you know, we have a space we're trying to lease right now, and it's just it's like, how can you do business right now? There's no market there, right? We get close with somebody and it's just, there's so much, again, like the example I was using with the rooftop dining, there's so much uncertainty right now against regulations, and are we going to have a second shutdown in the fall? It's really hard to make business and investment decisions going forward. Or like, what is the right time to talk to a tenant about? We have a tenant whose lease is expiring soon. Like, what's the right time to talk to a tenant in the restaurant industry about a lease that's expiring? Do you talk now where things are actually okay and people are outside dining? Do you wait until the fall where maybe we get a vaccine? Or, you know, there's a lot of like variables you wouldn't have had to think about 6 months ago going into that. Also be interested to see if in retail, if it becomes a thing where everybody's going to want outdoor space going forward, you know, because it's become so valuable right now. Having said that, one of the things I've been really impressed with, and I would love to see continue, is how willing the city has been to work with restaurateurs and retailers and landlords to get the permitting needed to get done to be able to do these things. It's been really easy, and I think that's really important, and would love to see that trend continue. And then just, I mean, anecdotally from us, we were looking at a residential building, and before the crisis hit, and we were looking at doing smaller units, like 350 square foot studios. And can you imagine being stuck for 4 months in your 350 square foot studio? Like, it's essentially a padded room. Like, we should just supply pads for people. Like, it's just, I don't see, like that project will be interesting to revisit post-COVID, because I don't know what the demand's going to look like for micro units. I think people are going to want a real desire for space, especially in their living environment, and a push for outdoor space and green space, because, I mean, this is very fresh in people's minds. But it's interesting. I mean, humans adapt. So it'll, someone said to me yesterday, very wisely, you know, muscle memory, right? Like, we're building the muscle memory of working from home and getting into these routines. So it'll be interesting to see how long that muscle memory lasts.
I completely agree. I think that's an interesting way to put it, of, you know, we're in training for this new normal right now, and what that will look like going forward. You know, Tim, building on the new normal, and thinking about more of the transactional relationship and the relationship between the tenant and the landlord, how do you see, or how do you think that will change in the post-COVID environment?
Well, it's interesting right now, it's already changing. And, you know, almost every lease says that this lease contains the full agreement between the parties, and no other agreements, verbal or implied or otherwise, are valid unless they're contained in the lease. Well, we want more, tenants want more from landlords, and landlords actually want more from tenants right now than are in the leases. So for example, our clients' leases don't say, hey, we want destination elevator systems installed in your building. Hey, we want security guards to really help enforce mask wearing by everybody who enters. We want 3 times a day cleaning of every restroom, right? Many of my clients have shared restrooms. I'm in the multi-tenant world. By the way, we would like the building to install MERV 13 or MERV 15 air filters and increase the fresh air mix into the building. Well, that's not in the lease, but we want it now. And by the way, we'd like ultraviolet germicidal irradiation systems installed in the fresh air intakes that are coming into the tenant spaces to knock out pathogens. One of the buildings in town has installed a system of plasma cluster ions that are bathed into the elevators, and then that isolates contagions, and then they're exhausted through the elevator venting, the cab venting system. Wow, we want that. But but landlords also want things from tenants that are not in the leases. For example, landlords don't want to have to enforce with their paying clients. So landlords want to put the burden on the tenant to make sure your people are healthy, make sure they're social distancing, make sure they're not infecting others. And if they're coming in and piling 8 people into an elevator, well, we want to notify that tenant. The landlord wants to notify the tenant and depend on the tenant for the enforcement of a max of 4 people per elevator. The landlord wants the tenant to notify. We certainly want to be notified if somebody in our building or our elevator bank or, heaven forbid, our floor is infected with COVID. Well, by the same token, we want other tenants to notify the landlord, and the landlord wants to be notified in that. That's not contained in the lease, but we all want it. So it's forced a higher level of partnership actually between tenants and landlords. And you think about what's going forward. Well, I'm already seeing one of my favorite buildings, One Liberty, with a pretty persistent new advertising campaign. Hey, we were voted the cleanest building in the city the last 4 years, long before all this happened, and we'll keep continuing to be the cleanest building. But I do think that the infrastructure investment, the policies and procedures of the buildings, the caliber of the vertical transportation, and the staffing and the janitorial service and the wellness, which it's trickled into the marketing of buildings with fit buildings and well buildings. I think that's going to have a much more pronounced effect in the future on how space gets marketed. And I think we're starting to see the new growth of that right now. And I predict over the balance of 2020 and beyond that that's going to be an even more important plank and foundational argument of how listing agents and buildings get marketed to tenants.
Absolutely. I think that is some great insight. It offers us a really great platform actually to transition into our Q&A section. So we'd love to invite folks from the audience to submit any questions that you have through the Q&A function on Zoom. That's at the bottom of your screen. But to kick off that section of our program this morning, we got a question, Tim, while you were speaking for David Paletti. David, Tim mentioned some examples of things that he's seeing in the marketplace in terms of requests from tenants to landlords, or even measures that landlords are just taking in order to bring tenants back into the building. What are some examples of common requests that you think you'll be requesting of landlords in your multi-tenant situation to ensure the safety of your employees?
Well, I think the biggest thing is how is the landlord going to manage all of the tenants? We can take responsibility, and they have to be vigilant about, the work rules, the workspace, how they're going to clean the building, how they're going to secure the building, and some of the things that Tim mentioned, ventilation, more ventilation into the building, things like that, are all things we're going to ask for. And it's really going to be driven by associate requests. We're getting those questions now. We have a hotline for these type of questions, and all the things Tim outlined are being asked by our associates. So we in turn have an obligation to try and push the envelope again to keep our associates as safe as we can.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I like the hotline idea. I'm sure is giving you a lot of information to bring that in from your constituency. I think that that's a great idea. I haven't necessarily heard of anyone else doing that. I think that's awesome. The second question along the same track, but a bit more specific. And actually, Brianna, I'd love to get your take on this first, and then maybe we'll get some of the other panelists to jump in. Question is, based on the current situation, we anticipate needing less space long-term as we'll have more people working remotely, but we're in a long-term lease. What's the best approach to deal with this with our landlord?
Here we go. Here we go.
I think conversations are really, you have to start with a conversation, right? And it has to, and you better understand your relationship with your landlord. And you better hope it's a good one. But I'd love to hear from David and Tim on this, but from a landlord's perspective, don't just send me a freaking letter that's like, hey, we're not paying rent for the next 3 months, or hey, we need to downsize. That goes over really poorly, and it immediately positions us as really defensive. That one tenant who asked for that, it became like, I don't want to give you anything. But like for the 3 tenants who are calling me and being like, hey, we are down 95%, I can't be open. And by the way, our storefronts got broken in June with some of the unrest. Like, it's a really different conversation. So, but I think it's important to have the conversation.
Yeah, it's funny.
Absolutely.
It's funny. Brianna, when I saw that question, I'm like, oh boy. Same reaction Tim had was, here we go.
Yeah.
That was probably the first day of the pandemic. I got maybe 3 of those calls, and you know, my reaction was actually exactly what Brianna just said. Was the first thing I said to the client is, look, you got to start with a dialogue with you. Nobody really knows. And, you know, now, by the way, that doesn't mean that you don't have a placeholder for your legal rights. And it's a little late now to start with that. But the people who did it at the beginning of the pandemic, if they sent their landlord a letter that said, look, we're not sure what our rights are, but just so you know, we're gonna say that we've got some rights here. And depending on what their contracts or what the lease said and what the law was, you know, you have to tailor that. But following up on that very quickly, or maybe simultaneously with it, or maybe even before the letter, was, hey, let's talk about this. You're going to get a letter from us, you know, preserving our rights. But what we really want to do is talk to you, because this isn't working for both of us. You don't want a tenant that's going to go broke, and you want a tenant that's going to perform. Here's how we think we can perform on a long-term basis so it benefits both of us. And if you approach it that way, I think the landlord will be receptive.
There's a great like kind of philosophy I always have. Like, it's not like a zero-sum situation. You always want to think win-win, right? Like, think very expansively. And I think you can only get there through that conversation, because maybe there is a solution that everybody can figure out. We have to have the conversation.
Well, I've been exposed to a study where, and it's over 30 days old now, but 65% of American chief financial officers believe that their company will occupy less space than they do now. So I think the work from home drill has trained everybody to understand that more work from home can happen than previously. Now, this is going to be an interesting dynamic with landlords and tenants, and it comes to leverage and it comes to cooperation. Landlords will address tenants' needs, but they will get lease term extensions. We've been tracking carefully, and we have not seen a flood of sublease space come onto the market yet. Traditionally, July and August are somewhat slow periods in our industry, and then September through the end of the year, it's go time and the pedals to the metal. And we will all be watching to see if a avalanche of sublease spaces come onto the market. Subleases are difficult to move. Tenants frequently only capture 50 or 60 or so cents on the dollar on their remaining lease obligation. Landlords are not going to want all sorts of discordant spaces back in their buildings. Landlords are fighting tenaciously now to keep their rental rates, their face rental rates strong. And most of the landlords in the Philadelphia marketplace have a higher cost basis than their predecessor. So maintaining those face rents that are strong, high numbers is important. And many might have covenants in their loans, and everybody wants the rents to stay high. And landlords are trying to hold the line on that topic now. But I think any student of economics understands that we've entered into a recession. Nobody knows how severe it might be, but there is no doubt that we're in one. And historically, that's meant a loosening in the market, decline in rental rates, and a higher vacancy level. I think a lot of tenants are going to want to redesign their space. Some of our clients are experiencing that now. And the office is going to be for meeting with clients and meeting with colleagues and innovation and collaboration. And much of the head down focused work might take place at home. But we're also going to see, which is interesting for the architects and engineers in our audience today, the audience has to, almost like the Google or method, the audience now, or the office now really needs to be a draw. It needs to be an experiential place that brings people back to work. And that's where the culture happens. That's where the mentorship, the training, the loyalty happens. So I think we're going to see what is designed in an office change during the course of the aftermath of this pandemic, to make the office more of a draw, to pull people back out and be the place where it happens and the place where people want to be.
Absolutely. And we got a question sort of on that track that I'd like to put out. Beyond MEP and HVAC upgrades, have you received requests for permanent architecture and design changes from your tenants, or for permission for the tenants to make those permanent modifications themselves? How much have we seen that come up in the conversation of late, if at all?
Well, it's been interesting. So we're looking at one project that's out a little bit further than some others, and we brought this up to the potential client tenant, and they're like, we're not there yet to think about that. We don't know what we're going to want. We don't know what this looks like. So like on one hand, you have like some tenants who are like, where it's like theirs is a development that's like farther out, like 4 or 5 years. Whereas other tenants are like more upfront. Like I think Tim or David mentioned elevators, right? Like destination dispatch, or like how do we go touchless in the elevators? And Tim, you bring up an interesting point with the office design about it being more flexible and like innovative, but we're also trying to program more for like giving people more space, like a person per square foot, those numbers going up. But also like there's going to be interesting tension, I think, because people will want closed office space as well, where they can actually like close a door and be alone, to kind of like that, again, that perception of safety. So it'll be interesting how the spaces start to close off. But as we're looking at design of some of these spaces, we're certainly thinking about those sort of questions.
David Paletti had I'm sorry. Go ahead, David.
No, go ahead, Caitlin.
I was going to say, David Paletti, I'm curious to understand, if you internally are considering or have engaged in any architecture design changes as a result of the current environment.
We've discussed it, but I think to Brianna's point, we're not ready to pull the trigger yet. We don't know where exactly this is going to land. I think to Tim's point, I think he made a great point, and this is our thinking, especially with our new headquarter building. We're trying to design something that's going to be a wow factor, that when people come to the building, they're going to want to come there to work. And I think that's very important, because if the office environment is just like your home, a cubicle in a densely populated space, it brings nothing to the table. You might as well work from home. But if you go to your office and there's great collaboration spaces and conferencing, and there's great AV systems and the like, and that experience will want people to come back to the office, and that's our feeling.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned the AV perspective, right? Like technology at home is really hard. It just,
Yeah.
I don't have a printer. I go to the office to print things. Like that's the
Yes.
draw for the office. It's like I can print things here. It's really the AV. That's a really, really good point. I think that's really smart.
Yeah, I was actually surprised to hear David say that that collaborative space is still very much on the agenda, because one of now we're dinosaurs here. We're lawyers. Remember, we're always the last to do things the way everybody else does. But when we last bid out our space, we were told by one team of architects that we did not hire that we needed more collaborative space. And we said, but you don't understand how we work. We go into our offices. We're either on the phone or on our computer all day. We don't want to see other people. We don't want to talk to other people. We just want to get our work done and bill our clients. So we didn't hire that architect. We hired an architect who understood that. And lo and behold, we're sitting here with offices where people can go into and shut the door. And we're really happy because we don't have to worry about, well, in collaborative space, how do people interact now? Because how are they going to actually be socially distant while collaborating in collaborative space? So I'm just curious from David, like how do you collaborate and socially distant at the same time?
Well, it's a good question. The spaces are big, number one, and I think you'll have less people in the room. If you were going to sit 20 people in a room, you're going to sit 5. But I think the idea is that you're still going to want to interact with your associates, just you're going to have to social distance, and the space will have to lend itself to do that. And I think the other thing is, we will get a vaccine, and not that we're going to work differently in the future. This will have a long-term lasting effect, no question. But I think we'll figure it out. And the reality is work requires collaboration, and we're going to need to figure out how to do it.
I completely agree. Shifting gears a little bit, this applies locally, but I think you could also think about it nationally in terms of businesses that maybe have a satellite office or a headquarters here in Philadelphia or Pennsylvania with locations in other states. But from a more local perspective, there's been a lot of differentiation in the speed of reopening and the restrictions in different counties, especially surrounding Philadelphia County, with businesses who may potentially have multiple locations in differing areas. Do we see a kind of split where perhaps they're going to open their suburban offices first versus their downtown offices, or do we see folks taking a more holistic corporate approach to say, when we're open, if we're not, we're not?
Well, I would tell you that our firm has a client that their employees were used to taking public transit to work in the downtown core, and they voiced a lot of apprehension about that. And I think many companies feel like they can get compliance with their employees in the workplace to adhere to social distancing guidelines and a safe, healthy workplace. But you got to get there, and you don't know who's on the street, and public transit can be a barrier. So we've already seen that group almost experimentally take a sublease that had a space that was furnished in our western suburbs that's easily accessible, and you can drive in your own car there. You can walk up the stairs if you choose instead of being in the elevator, and you can go to work and use a printer, Brianna, or a scanner. You can also meet with your colleagues or meet with clients there in that space and not have to come downtown. So we've all been reading about how on fire the residential market is all around suburban New York, and people fleeing the city, and they want more space, and they want a yard, and they want to be able to be outside and feel less dense when they walk. And I think that there might be a pendulum back, and more likelihood that many of our clients who do have a downtown presence will have a western suburbs or an eastern suburbs of New Jersey office as a touch point for employees that don't want to have to use the downtown location or don't want to use public transit to arrive to work. I think we're already seeing that, and we'll have a more decentralized workforce and more opportunities to accommodate. It might also allow people to access more people throughout our region as a potential workforce than their current downtown location might only allow.
We definitely encourage everyone to drive and to park. We love parking.
You'll have electric car chargers there in your...
We got everything. Just keep driving.
Absolutely. Kind of, going off that theme of travel, we got a question regarding business expansion, state to state, and that being a big part of our current, or what was our marketplace, businesses looking to come to and expand in Pennsylvania or other states. What do we see as the impact on that kind of development and those sort of sales moving forward?
I guess one question is where are they moving from, right? In other words, but I'd be curious what Brianna has to say.
No, I mean, like, just I think we mentioned this before the call started, but like, we're working across markets, right? We have multiple parking lots in multiple markets, and we're actually working on a development deal in another market. And every conversation I have, I start with, hey, what's the environment like down here? Because it's state to state is so different, right? With each of the COVID restrictions. So actually, I think in some respects makes doing business a little bit harder, because you have to, regulations we're like 50 small countries right now, rather than a federal system where you have one sort of guiding law. Everybody has very different regulations based on where they are in the curve. So it's like adjusting for what's happening there, adjusting for what's open, adjusting for like one of the deal has a public funding component, and understanding like whether that financing agency is open or not. And it's just, you have to be really thoughtful about where you're expanded and not overextend, I think, just because it's a lot to keep track of just from a human perspective. David, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, that's fine, actually. I think you're more of an authority. My question really is partly, where are people moving from? So, for example, we were seeing a little bit, not as much as I think we in Philadelphia always hope we will, but we were seeing a little bit of migration to Philadelphia from places like New York or other places where there's been very expensive real estate. There's a part of me that says, there's sort of an old adage that people like to have their businesses where their CEOs live or close to it. So if CEOs are fleeing New York, will you see the businesses follow? That will be a very interesting analysis.
Well, and especially when you look at, right, the domino effect of everything that's happening, right? We saw a couple restaurants have closed in Philadelphia recently. So if you live in the city because of the amenities that the city provide, and those amenities start to disappear, and you can work remotely, why would you live in the city? I mean, there's the collaboration aspect of it, of course, but like it becomes and it's more expensive. I think that's like, there's the price component, like you just mentioned. I think it becomes a really interesting kind of metric evaluation.
Absolutely. I think,
the only thing I want to add is, on the other hand, if it means that in order to get from location to location, people are going to have to get on airplanes or trains or other things that people aren't really using right now, are people going to move to more centralized locations and at least be all together, so that they don't have to get on a plane or a train or whatever? That's
a really good point.
I think that's a great point, because I think when this conversation has come up, just externally and personally, we've talked about that residential move and the residential market in terms of suburbs, and we're not going to touch on that today, but I think another great topic for everyone to consider in the wake of the post-COVID environment. And another question that we got from our audience members that I'd love to hear a little bit on from Tim and David Skolnick is, are you seeing any actual lease revisions in new leases or amendments that address future pandemic-related closures?
Tim, you want to start?
Well, I mean, the single thing that has happened here most quickly is the word pandemic or government shutdown or unavailability of materials has immediately crept into every first draft of the force majeure clause in every lease, right? So what I'm seeing from my clients and our experience has been, we had 8 clients that had signed leases. I think 6 of the 8 were relocating to another building. Of course, this is after we made the current landlord compete to retain them. And each one of those construction durations became longer. So then we had to seek a postponement of the lease, and we want the whole year of free rent that we signed up for to be postponed. And the landlord said, well, you know, we made our first proposal to your client more than a year ago, and we've kept the space off the market all that time. So we had that push and pull. So I do think there will be more flexibility in construction scheduling in the future in this new environment. Because we saw the high-rise buildings shut down their freight elevators, so only 2 people could be in the freight elevator at one time, and you couldn't move the men and materials up and down in the buildings. And then we had the 6 to 7 week shutdown of non-essential construction. So yes, we're already seeing new clauses in the leases that we're negotiating on behalf of our clients.
Yeah,
and I'm sure David has a more scholarly
no,
interpretation.
I mean, look, well, I don't know about scholarly, but I mean, it's the same. I mean, I think we're seeing everybody adjusting to the situation, whether it's, yes, a modification. I'm working on a work letter modification right now where the tenant and the landlord had an agreement for space. They thought they were going to do it a certain way. This sort of happened, and the deadlines aren't moving as much as everybody feared, which is the good news. And the other good news is they now realize they want to do things very differently than they were going to do it, but they're working much more collaboratively than they were originally. Whereas the tenant was going to have one contractor and the landlord was going to have a contractor. Now the tenant decides, you know what, this with everything that's going on and social distancing and all that, we're much better off if we use the same contractor as the landlord. So that's going on. And then the other thing that I have going on is I have a client that's leasing space to a nursing home. And you can imagine that one of the things that we have talked about and placed in the first draft of the document, and we'll see how it works, is indemnities, allocations of risk of if somebody gets sick and there's a claim against somebody, whose responsibility is it? And I suspect those provisions are going to appear a lot more and with a lot more frequency than previously.
Absolutely. Absolutely. One more question from our audience in the next 5 minutes before we close. And I'm going to ask that each of our panelists respond to this. And David Paletti, perhaps we can start with you. This is actually not something that even came up in our conversations, but I think it's very insightful. And it's basically, how do we define post-COVID? Is it vaccine availability, infection rate percentage, when we're no longer to wear a mask or required to wear a mask or social distance? You know, how are each of us or our organizations defining post-COVID? David Paletti, if you could start, that would be great.
I'm not sure I have a direct answer for that. I would probably start with the vaccine. I would just say, you know, the perspective that I have is that this is one pandemic. I think we have to prepare for other pandemics moving forward. I think it's a lesson learned here that we weren't prepared for this one, and I think it would be naive to think that there aren't going to be other pandemics of some sort that we are going to have to deal with, and I think that's where the preparation has to start.
Tim, what are your thoughts on that question?
Well, post-COVID, I guess, is definitely going to be upon the widespread availability of an effective vaccine. However, I think we would all be very naive to think that this is the last pandemic. And my partner had plans to go to a wedding in the Caribbean, and pregnant women were not going, or women that wanted to get pregnant because of Zika. If we remember Zika, that was only a couple years ago, right? And we've had Ebola that luckily did not really reach America. But we all know Philadelphia was a hot spot in the 1918 global flu pandemic. And the decision to have that parade that exacerbated that pandemic will live in infamy in Philadelphia's history. So I think that preparation for future pandemics, whatever they might bring, is the new watchword, because this is not the last one. So there will be a post-COVID-19. It will, I don't believe that there will be a post-COVID-19 with a treatment with good efficacy, because if that still involves you being sick for a week or two and on a ventilator at the hospital, that's no fun. So maybe there's a pill or a magic injection once you get it that would also allow us to believe that we're in the post-COVID-19 world. But the reality is, even in the post-COVID-19 world, we're not going to be in the post-pandemic world. So buckle up, kids. Here we go. Let's be cognizant of that. That's the reality going forward.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Brianna, are you in agreement with that reaction from Tim?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not an infectious disease doctor, so I guess I agree with you. I mean, like, we don't know. I think the biggest realization, right, was that it's got to be it's at least the vaccine, because like when Pennsylvania went to green, right? Green, everybody thought like, oh, full steam ahead, like accelerator, right? That's not like what green is or was. It's like you're still at 50% occupancy. Work from home is strongly encouraged. Like, it's not normal. So hopefully it's a vaccine. And then Tim, I think your thoughts are really
green
good.
Just means they have room in the ICU for you.
I know, but like green is so misleading. Green is like, okay, we're free, yay. It's like, no, you're not free until maybe there's a vaccine. Yeah, I don't know. It's a really good question.
Yeah, and actually, David Skolnick, for your response, I'm going to take the liberty to rephrase a little bit and ask, does post-COVID mean back to normal?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, I think Tim said that, Tim said that correctly. I don't know what post-COVID means, and I guess what I would say is, I won't tell you what it means, but I'll know it when I see it. And when I see it, it's when we tell our employees, we expect you to be in the office.
Agree. Yes.
That will be the minute that we know it's post-COVID. And
the litmus test.
Say that again.
The litmus test.
The litmus test, exactly.
When the email goes out, everybody's due in the office.
Right. I mean, it's kind of funny when we got into this. I was remembering with a colleague that I'm on my firm's board, and we were trying to figure out on the shutdown, sort of how we shut down and when we shut down. And I remember it very distinctly because on a Thursday we had a call saying, well, on Monday we had I don't forget which Monday in March, we had a conversation with our employees and sent out an email to our employee that if you feel comfortable and you can work from home, and we have the technology for you to do that, if you feel more comfortable doing that, we're allowing you to work from home. By Thursday, we had a meeting where we said, we encourage you to work from home. And by that Sunday, we had an email go out to everybody that said, you must work from home. Coming out of it, I expect this time frame to last, timeline to last, get ready, between 8 months and a year from the time we said, we don't allow you to come into the office, to now we're in the point where we encourage you to stay home unless client needs require you to be in the office, to the point where, okay, if you want to work from home, it's okay with us. That's the next step. We're not there yet. I know a lot of people may be, but we're really not there at, only work from home if you want to. And so that's the next step, and I think that's going to be months away. And then after that, finally, will be you must come into the office. And I can't tell you where that's going to be, but I would be surprised I would be shocked if it's before January 1, and I wouldn't be surprised if we're sitting here next year at this time, still not quite there.
Well, I like, David, how you phrased it though, as like it's a next step. It's really hard to see 5 steps ahead right now, but to just know like that's the next step, I think is a really good way to look at or phrase it or to answer that question.
I completely agree. And that really sets the platform for our closing question. We're gonna close the Q&A for today. So some closing thoughts from our panelists. This is a question that came up as we prepared for today, and we thought it would be an interesting way to end. And the question is, in 5 years, will everyone remember that this happened? Or, in a more specific way, what do we see as the lasting effects of COVID? Brianna, I'd love to hear from you first.
Yeah, so I think, it'll be interesting because I think there were trends that were being adopted before, right? Or like, if I drew a little thing, if like telework and telehealth were on like this part of the bell curve, like it's now been pushed over. So you're going to see more. I was trying to do this like it's going to be a more rapid adoption of those things because we've been forced to do it. And turns out a lot of this stuff works, right? Like telehealth works, telemedicine works, and there's going to be a trickle down effect of that on the real estate market, right? So if you can telework, less office space. And what does that look like? And what does new office space look like? Is it more experiential? How do you get people to come to the office? Or are you going to see booms residentially in areas where you weren't before? What does telemedicine look like? I think my generation's been through a lot. So it's just, one thing after another. And I think, to the muscle memory, right? We're going to get used to some things, but I think humans also adapt. And I think we miss sort of, right? Like how many people want to go to a concert right now? So like, I think a lot of these venues are going to stay, right? Like, and maybe you're not comfortable going next July, but thinking about the last question that just got asked of us, I'd be really interested. I think this thing ends when you have a sporting event that's got 50,000 people in the stadium, because this thing really started when this got serious when the NBA canceled their season, right? And so like, once you can have an Eagles game with like 50,000 screaming fans cheering on Carson Wentz, I mean, I think we're through it, and I think things will feel like they're back to normal. And there'll be some legacy changes out of it, but I'd be interested to see, how long the memory is on this one, and whether it snaps back, like David Paletti was talking about, is like, are we really going to change everything when social distancing isn't a thing? So it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Absolutely, thank you. And with that segue, David Paletti, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What are going to be the lasting effects?
Well, I think we've definitely changed the way we're going to work in the future, and I think we're definitely going to have a different office environment. I don't think we'll forget it, because I think this was a tipping point to push some companies to adapt to the trends in the industry, where technology is allowing people to work anywhere and be relatively efficient, notwithstanding some of the things I brought up earlier about collaboration and what Tim mentioned, the face-to-face stuff is still important, especially for us of the older generation, not a millennial, Brianna, but I think the millennials are a little more adept at that. But I do think, and I hope, that person-to-person, face-to-face work continues. I think it's important.
Great, thank you. David Skolnick, your final thoughts.
Yeah, no, I think there are going to be changes, that this was all a bad dream and we'll go back to the way things were on some things, but I think other things are here to stay. I think I'm in agreement with the other panelists. I think, health in buildings that Tim was talking about before, how healthy is your building is going to be. Now it's going to go from, one of the top 5 things that someone's worried about to number 1. And it's going to be that way, I think, for a long time. People are going to think about, should I be in a low rise instead of a high rise? Because if this happens again, maybe, right now I'm sitting here overlooking the Parkway, a beautiful view from the 28th floor. I can see Boathouse Row. It's one of my favorite things. But compared to my health, is it really important to have that view? I don't know. So I think people's priorities are going to change. And I think we're going to see, and legal documents, the kinds of things that we were talking about before, I think there's no question, every time there's something like this, documents get changed, and they rarely get changed back. I mean, environmental is not that big a deal in most in most office settings, and yet how long are the environmental provisions in leases? Well, guess what? People are going to change these leases to allocate risks and to do the things that Tim was talking about in terms of adding pandemics to force majeure clause, and those are going to be here to stay.
Absolutely. And Tim, please, will we remember this in 5 years? What will be the lasting effects?
I'll answer that question with a question. Who remembers showing up at the airport half hour before the flight, walking right in and getting on that airplane and flying to your destination without having to go through the security line? 9/11 was scarring and long-lasting. And we're still, I mean, how many people are employed by the, what is it, the TSA? That changed our lives forever, okay? COVID-19 has been scarring. It is going to have a lasting reverberation, and it will foment a cultural change that we're seeing inklings of now. You know, we saw the meltdown after 9/11 in the 2002. Then we saw the 2008 crash of the world financial markets, and that's led to a cultural change. And we see that with millennials no longer believe that a 30-year mortgage and paying off that mortgage is the route to wealth in America. And nobody believes in that permanency anymore. And they want a more experienced life, and they want to be able to lock and leave. And in some ways, Parkway's been the beneficiary or the solution to that, in that we've gone with the pendulum has swung back to more apartment living than home living. So those changes had lasting effects. Those scarring episodes have lasting effects. And I believe this pandemic will too. None of us know exactly what all the permutations of that will be, but there will be some. And I think in our industry, the wellness of office buildings is the first thing that we'll all be conscious of, and there will be others as well. So that's my thoughts on that topic.
Thank you so much. And that brings us right on time. I cannot thank our panelists enough for today and their hard work in preparation for today. Thank you for our audience for joining us. We hope that you found the conversation insightful and helpful. We look forward to more of these discussions moving forward, as we can only get through this thing together. So thank you to everyone, and we hope that you have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks, Caitlin.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.